Hey everyone, welcome to my channel from start to now. If you love uncovering hidden stories from history, you're in the right place. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss our future videos. Let's dive in. Have you ever noticed how some chapters of history barely make it into our classrooms? How entire civilizations, epic stories, and hidden truths seem almost erased from the textbooks? Today, we're uncovering the Mexico that history books won't show you, the stories Americans were never taught. By the end of this video, you'll never look at maps, textbooks, or the story of North America the same way again. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's explore Mexico's hidden history. The secrets that have been buried for centuries. Mexico's ancient civilizations were far more advanced than most people realize. And when you look closely at the Olmecs, Maya, and Mexica, you start to see a level of sophistication that challenges almost everything taught in simplified history classes. These civilizations didn't just survive in the ancient world. They thrived, innovated, and built knowledge systems that influenced centuries of development. The Olmecs, often called the mother civilization of Mesoamerica, were forming complex societies at a time when many other cultures around the world were still in early developmental stages. They created enormous basalt heads, some weighing more than 20 tons, carved with astonishing precision despite not having metal tools. They developed early writing systems, practiced sophisticated farming, and laid the foundation for the cultures that would follow. Their ability to organize labor, transport massive stones across great distances, and craft detailed art shows a level of engineering and social coordination that stands far above the primitive image people are often taught about early American societies. The Maya took intellectual advancement to a whole different level. They created one of the most accurate calendar systems in human history, based entirely on their observations of celestial bodies. This wasn't luck or chance. It was the result of generations of astronomers who studied planetary movements with incredible detail. They knew the exact length of a solar year, tracked the cycles of Venus, predicted eclipses, and aligned their temples with the movements of the sun and stars. Their understanding of time and astronomy rivaled, and in some cases surpassed, that of ancient Egypt, Greece, and even medieval Europe. While many think of the Maya only for their pyramids, their brilliance extended far beyond architecture. They developed a fully functional written language composed of glyphs, recorded historical events, scientific knowledge, and stories of their rulers. This was one of the few written languages of the ancient Americas, and it reveals a society dedicated to learning, documentation, and intellectual growth. Mathematically, the Maya were among the earliest users of the concept of zero, something many civilizations did not adopt until thousands of years later. Their number system allowed them to perform large calculations with ease, and this mathematical strength influenced their architecture, city planning, and astronomical measurement. To build the temples, palaces, and cities they left behind, they needed engineers who understood geometry, weight distribution, and structural balance. These buildings were not thrown together. They were designed with intention and precision, aligned with cosmic events, and built to withstand time. Then we arrive at the Mexica, commonly called the Aztecs, who built one of the greatest cities the world had ever seen, Tenochtitlan. This city, constructed on a lake, was a masterpiece of engineering. The Mexica created causeways, canals, bridges, and floating gardens known as chinampas that allowed them to grow crops with extraordinary efficiency. These chinampas produced enough food to sustain a massive population, proving the Mexica had mastered agriculture in ways that modern researchers still study. The city itself was cleaner, more organized, and more technologically advanced than many European cities of the time. Visiting Spaniards described Tenochtitlan with awe, comparing it to the finest cities in Europe and noting its remarkable cleanliness, order, and beauty. The Mexica also developed advanced systems of education requiring all children, regardless of social class, to attend school. They taught history, ethics, warfare, farming, arts, and science. This universal education system contradicted the stereotype that ancient American societies were intellectually inferior. Their medical knowledge was also notable. They understood herbal medicine, performed minor surgeries, treated wounds with natural antiseptics, and used plants that modern medical science still acknowledges for their healing properties. Their understanding of the natural world came from centuries of observation and experimentation, passed down through generations of healers and scholars. The architectural achievements of ancient Mexico are equally impressive. Structures like the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacán, the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichén Itzá, and the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlán show mastery over stone, symmetry, and design. These were not small communities building crude shelters. These were civilizations constructing monumental cities with plazas, palaces, temples, road systems, aqueducts, and markets that supported tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, of people. The scale of these cities demonstrates advanced government systems, economic planning, labor organization, and resource management. The agricultural innovations of ancient Mexican civilizations also reshaped the world. Crops like maize, beans, squash, chili peppers, chocolate, and avocados were domesticated and refined in Mexico long before Europeans arrived. Maize corn, in particular, is one of the most important crops in human history, and its development required sophisticated understanding of plant genetics and selective breeding. It didn't grow naturally the way it grows today. It was engineered over thousands of years by indigenous farmers who understood biology long before the word even existed. Trade networks connected distant regions, allowing goods to move across thousands of miles. Jade, obsidian, cacao, textiles, and ceramics traveled across territories, showing that these civilizations had economic systems similar to those in other advanced parts of the world. Their art reflected philosophical depth, religious symbolism, and social complexity. Their music used instruments crafted with precision. Their clothing was woven with techniques that showed skill and artistry. These were societies built on knowledge, innovation, and discipline. They were scientists without lab coats, engineers without blueprints, astronomers without telescopes, and architects without steel. Yet they created achievements that still stand strong today, defying time, earthquakes, and colonization. Their brilliance wasn't accidental. It was built, learned, refined, and passed down carefully through generations. And the more you study their accomplishments, the clearer it becomes that these civilizations were not simply ancient cultures, but advanced, powerful societies that shaped the foundation of the Americas more than most people realize. The reason so much of Mexico's history was erased or minimized in American education goes far deeper than simple oversight. It wasn't an accident, and it wasn't because the history lacked importance. It was a deliberate shaping of narrative, a rewriting of the past designed to support political goals, cultural beliefs, and national identity. When you look closely, you begin to understand how certain historical truths were filtered out, softened, or distorted to create a version of North American history that placed Europe at the center of progress, while ignoring the incredible achievements of indigenous and Mexican civilizations. This selective teaching created generations of people who grew up believing that the continent was underdeveloped before European arrival, that Mexico contributed little to the shaping of North America, and that the United States rose through purely internal strength rather than through aid. Combination of influences and inheritances from diverse cultures. One major factor behind this erasure was the era of manifest destiny, a belief held in the 19th century that the United States was destined to expand westward across North America. This ideology was used to justify taking huge portions of land from Mexico and indigenous peoples, but to make expansion appear righteous or inevitable, The narrative needed to portray the people living on those lands as less advanced, less organized, and less deserving of it. If schoolchildren believed that Mexico had a strong, sophisticated history, deeply rooted in the continent, then the justification for taking half of its territory would have been harder to defend. And so, the narrative was shaped to focus on the idea that the land was empty, wild, or underdeveloped, waiting for civilization to arrive. This version of history ignored the advanced cities, trade routes, agriculture, astronomy, and government systems that existed long before Europeans stepped foot on the continent. American textbooks in the 1008, hundreds and early 1900s often described Mexico using negative stereotypes, portraying it as weak, chaotic, or backwards. This wasn't based on truth, but on political needs. After the Mexican-American War, the United States needed its citizens to view Mexico as inferior in order to justify the massive land acquisition. As a result, American schools emphasized European accomplishments while minimizing indigenous and Mexican ones. Even when ancient civilizations like the Maya or Mexica were mentioned, they were often presented as mysterious, primitive, or doomed to collapse rather than as thriving, advanced cultures with centuries of scientific achievement. Another reason for the erasure was the colonial mindset inherited from Europe. European colonizers often believed their culture was the pinnacle of civilization, and anything outside that world was considered less important. This belief carried into the writing of history books. Instead of acknowledging the brilliance of Mexican astronomy, engineering, medicine, and mathematics, historians framed European knowledge as the foundation of progress. This created an educational system that praised ancient Greece and Rome while ignoring equally impressive civilizations in the Americas. Students learned about the pyramids in Egypt, but not the pyramids in Teotihuacán. They learned about the Roman Empire, but not about the sprawling influence of the Maya. They learned about European navigation, but not about the agricultural genius of ancient Mexican societies. Language barriers also played a role. Many original texts from Maya, Mexica, and other civilizations were destroyed during colonization, and those that remained were written in indigenous languages that European and later American scholars didn't understand or didn't prioritize. Rather than investing time to translate and study these works, the educational system simply left them out, reinforcing the idea that their knowledge was less significant. When records are ignored, the story becomes easier to shape, and the absence of indigenous voices in historical documents allowed misconceptions to take root. Hollywood and popular media added another layer to the problem. Films, television shows, and adventure stories depicted ancient Mexican societies as violent, mysterious, or less developed, focusing on dramatic sacrifices rather than the intellectual, scientific, or architectural achievements that defined their civilizations. This created a powerful cultural image that made it easy for textbooks to gloss over the truth. When people hear the word Aztec, many think of warriors and rituals instead of floating gardens and advanced education systems. When they hear Maya, they think of a doomsday calendar instead of astronomy and mathematics. These exaggerated portrayals shaped public perception and made it harder for accurate history to become mainstream. Another reason American education minimized Mexican history was cultural separation. Many Americans grew up thinking of Mexico as a foreign country disconnected from U.S. history. But in reality, 1/3 of the United States used to be part of Mexico, and long before borders, indigenous and Mexican civilizations interacted, traded, and shared knowledge across the entire continent. This intertwined history didn't fit the narrative of two completely separate nations, and so it was largely left out, teaching children that their states were once part of Mexico, or that Mexican civilizations influenced U.S. Culture, language, and agriculture would have challenged the idea that America was built purely on European foundations. Even in the modern era, curriculum decisions are often influenced by politics. Some states choose textbooks that emphasize certain historical perspectives while downplaying others. When education becomes political, accuracy becomes secondary to ideology. This has allowed some misconceptions about Mexico to persist even today. Many students still don't learn about Tenochtitlán being one of the world's largest cities, the Maya being masters of astronomy, or the Olmecs developing early writing systems. Instead, the emphasis remains on European explorers, American presidents, and wars, heroes and narratives that support national pride. The result of this long-term erasure is a widespread gap in understanding. Many Americans know about the Roman Colosseum, but not about Chichén Itzá. They know about the Great Wall of China, but not about the massive avenue of Teotihuacán. They know about Greek philosophers, but not about Maya astronomers. This gap creates a distorted view of world history, one that elevates certain cultures while overlooking others that contributed just as much to human progress. But once you start uncovering the truth, everything changes. You begin to see Mexico not as a country defined by modern stereotypes, but as a cradle of scientific innovation, cultural brilliance, and architectural mastery. You begin to understand that the agricultural foundations of the modern world, corn, chocolate, tomatoes, vanilla, beans, came from ancient Mexican civilizations. You realize that the United States is far more connected to Mexico historically than most people were ever taught. And you start to question why these stories were hidden for so long and what our understanding of the continent would look like if they had been taught accurately from the beginning. When you fill in the missing chapters, the entire story of the Americas becomes deeper, richer, and more complete. Large parts of the United States were once deeply connected to Mexico, not just politically but culturally, economically, and historically in ways that many people never learned in school. The modern border that separates the two countries is a recent invention compared to the thousands of years of interaction that came before it. Long before there was a United States, long before there was a Mexico, the land we now call the American Southwest was part of a vast network of civilizations that traded, communicated, traveled, and shared knowledge across enormous distances. This connection didn't disappear simply because new borders were drawn. It shaped the land, the people, and the culture in ways that still echo today. When you look at a map of the United States and see states like California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Texas, it becomes clear that these areas have Mexican history embedded in their foundations, long before they were ever annexed into the United States. The land itself holds the evidence. Ancient trade routes stretched from central Mexico all the way into the southwest, with obsidian, jade, cacao, feathers, copper bells, and pottery moving through what are now American states. These routes were not random paths but organized networks that connected civilizations like the Mexica, Maya, and Teotihuacanos with indigenous groups in the U.S., such as the Pueblones, Apache, Hopi, and many others. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal objects of Mexican origin found deep inside U.S. territory, proving that these regions were not isolated worlds but culturally intertwined landscapes. Turquoise mined in the American Southwest, for example, was highly valued in Mesoamerica and made its way into temples, jewelry, and offerings hundreds of miles away. At the same time, plants, foods, and agricultural knowledge traveled north, shaping the farming traditions of indigenous communities throughout the U.S. When we talk about architecture, the connections become even clearer. The ancient Puebloan cliff dwellings, the great houses of Chaco Canyon, and the ceremonial kivas share architectural principles and cosmological alignments that mirror the practices of ancient Mexico. Both regions aligned structures with solar and lunar cycles, emphasized cardinal directions, and incorporated ceremonial spaces designed around cosmology. Researchers have long studied the similarities in religious practices, symbolism, and urban planning between these regions, finding patterns that only make sense when you recognize the deep cultural exchanges that took place. People were not simply living in isolated pockets. They were part of a larger sphere of influence that extended across the continent. Language also tells a powerful story. Many place names across the Southwest have Mexican or indigenous roots, reflecting the deeper history of the land. Words like Colorado, Nevada, Santa Fe, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Amarillo, and San Antonio come directly from Spanish, while countless rivers, mountains, and towns carry indigenous names that originated thousands of years ago. Even everyday English words like chocolate, tomato, coyote, chili, avocado, and mesquite come from Nahuatl, the language spoken by the Mexica and earlier civilizations. This means that Americans use Mexican origin words every day without realizing it, a reminder of how intertwined the cultures have always been. Food traditions across the Southwest and beyond also demonstrate how deeply Mexican influence runs through U.S. culture. Corn, beans, squash, chili peppers, tomatoes, and avocados, all staples in American cuisine, were cultivated and perfected by ancient Mexican civilizations. The techniques of preparing tortillas, tamales, stews, salsas, and roasted meats traveled north through trade and migration long before European arrival. Even cowboy culture, often portrayed as uniquely American, has strong Mexican roots. The word rodeo, the style of ranching, the gear, the techniques, and even the traditions of horseback riding came from vaquero culture, developed in Mexico and inherited in the Southwest before spreading across the U.S. ranching world. Religion and ceremony also reflect this historical connection. Indigenous groups in the American Southwest share cosmological ideas, symbols, and ceremonial traditions that closely resemble those of ancient Mesoamerica. The importance of cardinal directions, the reverence for the sun, the use of sacred calendars, and the symbolic meaning of animals and natural elements appear in both regions. Some scholars argue that certain mythologies may have spread north through cultural exchange, influencing legends, rituals, and artistic expressions. Political history seals the relationship even further. When the United States annexed Texas and later defeated Mexico in the Mexican-American War, it took almost half of Mexico's territory. Millions of people who lived there did not migrate. The border moved over them. Mexican families suddenly found themselves living in the United States without ever leaving their homes. Their culture, language, land ownership, and traditions became part of the new American territory. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo promised these families rights and protections, though many of those promises were broken. Still, their cultural legacy remained. Mexican ranching, farming, architecture, and town planning styles became foundational to the states that emerged. Adobe houses, plazas, courtyards, missions, and irrigation systems were all inherited from Mexican and Spanish Mexican traditions. Cities like San Diego, Tucson, Santa Fe, El Paso, and San Antonio still carry the imprint of Mexican architecture, music, festivals, and traditions. Even the layout of streets, the style of homes, and the names of neighborhoods reveal a history older than the United States itself. The cultural fusion that defines the American Southwest today is not a modern development. It is the continuation of an ancient connection that predates colonization by thousands of years. Even U.S. laws and land systems were shaped by Mexican systems. Water rights, for example, follow the Spanish Mexican tradition of communal use in many Western states. Ranch boundaries, cattle brand laws, and public land practices draw from Mexican precedents. Some of the earliest legal codes in the Southwest were written in Spanish because that's what the population spoke. These influences are often overlooked, yet they form the backbone of how these states still operate. The artistic influence is equally clear. Traditional pottery, weaving, metalwork, and carving styles across the Southwest show patterns, motifs, and colors that trace back to Mexican and Mesoamerican designs. Folk music traditions evolved alongside Mexican styles, blending instruments, rhythms, and melodies that crossed borders long before modern borders were established. Festivals like Dia de los Muertos, Los Posadas, and various saints' celebrations continue to be practiced across the Southwest, embraced by communities of all backgrounds because they reflect the region's historical soul. When you connect all these threads, it becomes impossible to separate U.S. history from Mexican history. The two are woven together through land, culture, language, food, architecture, agriculture, and shared lineage that stretches back thousands of years. Recognizing this connection changes the way you see the map, the people, and the story of North America itself. Mexico's true history profoundly reshapes how we understand North America because it reveals that the continent's story is not solely defined by European colonization or the formation of the United States, but by centuries of complex civilizations, cultural exchanges, and innovations that originated in what is now Mexico. When you start to examine the achievements of the Olmecs, Maya, Mexica, and other Mesoamerican societies, you realize that they were not isolated or primitive. They were advanced, sophisticated, and deeply influential. Their innovations in agriculture, mathematics, astronomy, architecture, governance, and social organization set the stage for the development of later societies across the continent. For example, the agricultural practices perfected in ancient Mexico, including the cultivation of maize, beans, squash, chili, and cacao, were not only vital to sustaining local populations, but also became foundational to food systems that spread far beyond Mexico, eventually reaching parts of what would become the United States and shaping diets for centuries. These agricultural techniques were coupled with remarkable engineering, such as the creation of chinampas or floating gardens, which allowed civilizations like the Mexica to support large urban populations in areas that otherwise would not have been arable. This combination of ingenuity and adaptation demonstrates that Mexico's civilizations were not only surviving, but thriving in ways that modern scholars still study and admire today. The intellectual contributions of these civilizations also challenge commonly held assumptions about the origins of knowledge in the Americas. The Maya, for instance, developed a calendar system that rivaled those of Europe and Asia in precision, tracked celestial movements with unparalleled accuracy, and created a concept of zero that was revolutionary for its time. Their architecture and city planning reflected a deep understanding of mathematics, geometry, and astronomy, with structures precisely aligned to the movements of the sun, moon, and planets. Similarly, the Mexica built Tenochtitlán, one of the largest cities in the world at its peak, with intricate canals, causeways, aqueducts, and urban planning that would rival European cities centuries later. The sophistication of these civilizations underscores that Mexico was a center of intellectual and cultural achievement long before European contact, and yet, this history has often been left out or downplayed in mainstream education. The selective omission of these accomplishments distorts the broader understanding of how human societies developed across the continent and diminishes recognition of the profound influence Mexico had on shaping the Americas. Beyond intellectual and agricultural achievements, Mexico's influence extends into language, culture, and daily life in the United States. Spanish, introduced during the colonial period, became the second most widely spoken language in the U.S., largely due to the movement of people from Mexico over centuries. Even beyond formal language, many words in English, such as chocolate, tomato, avocado, chili, coyote, and mesquite, come directly from Nahuatl or other indigenous languages of Mexico, embedding Mexican history into the very vocabulary of everyday life. Place names across the southwestern United States also reflect this heritage, from Los Angeles and San Diego to Colorado and Texas, serving as constant reminders of Mexico's historical and cultural influence on the land itself. These linguistic and geographic markers reveal that Mexican contributions are not peripheral or symbolic, but central to understanding the landscape, identity, and heritage of the region. Cultural traditions brought by Mexican communities have also become deeply woven into the social fabric of the United States. Celebrations like Dia de los Muertos, Los Posadas, and Cinco de Mayo have moved beyond local or immigrant communities to become widely recognized and celebrated events, influencing art, music, fashion, and public festivities. Mexican cuisine, once localized to border regions or immigrant neighborhoods, has grown into a defining feature of American food culture. From street tacos to gourmet adaptations and popular chains, reflecting centuries of culinary knowledge and creativity. Music, dance, and visual arts from Mexico have similarly enriched American culture, providing inspiration for artists, influencing genres, and introducing new rhythms, techniques, and stories. These cultural contributions illustrate how Mexico's historical legacy continues to shape the lived experience of millions of people in the United States, blending heritage with modern creativity in ways that are both tangible and enduring. The economic impact of Mexico on the United States further highlights this deep interconnection. Mexican workers and entrepreneurs have played crucial roles in agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and service industries, supporting local and national economies for generations. Migrants brought skills, labor, and entrepreneurial energy that not only helped develop infrastructure and industries, but also introduced new business models, techniques, and innovations. Mexican influence in agriculture, for instance, goes far beyond food cultivation. Traditional knowledge of irrigation, crop rotation, and land management informed practices that were adopted in the American Southwest and continue to sustain regional economies. At the same time, Mexican-born entrepreneurs and professionals contribute to a wide range of sectors, from technology and education to healthcare and the arts, demonstrating that Mexico's historical and contemporary influence is multidimensional and far-reaching. Historically, the connection between Mexico and the United States is inseparable because much of the modern U.S. was once part of Mexican territory. States like California, Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado were under Mexican governance prior to U.S. annexation, and the legal, social, and cultural systems established during that time left a lasting imprint. Mexican land grants, town layouts, architecture, agricultural practices, and legal traditions became embedded in the region, influencing settlement patterns, property law, and community organization. Even after political control shifted, the presence of Mexican communities and their cultural practices ensured that these legacies persisted, shaping the identity, governance, and social norms of the Southwest in ways that remain visible today. This continuity challenges the idea that U.S. history began solely with European colonization or westward expansion, revealing that Mexican history is foundational to understanding the development of the nation. The interplay of Mexican and U.S. history also demonstrates how historical narratives are shaped by power, politics, and selective memory. Much of Mexico's contributions have been minimized or ignored in American education, media, and popular culture, creating a skewed perception of history that elevates European influence while diminishing indigenous and Mexican achievements. Recognizing Mexico's impact changes this perspective, showing that the development of the United States was not isolated from its southern neighbor, but built in part on the knowledge, labor, and culture of Mexican and indigenous civilizations. By acknowledging these contributions, we gain a fuller, more accurate understanding of North American history and the forces that have shaped the continent's development. Ultimately, understanding Mexico's influence on the United States is not just about correcting historical omissions. It is about seeing the United States as part of a larger, interconnected story. It highlights the ways in which culture, knowledge, labor, and creativity cross borders, transcend political boundaries, and shape societies over centuries. Recognizing Mexico's role reveals a more nuanced and comprehensive view of American identity, one that values the contributions of diverse peoples and acknowledges that the continent's history is a shared history. This perspective helps us understand that modern American culture, language, cuisine, economy, and social structures are deeply rooted in Mexican history, and that appreciating these connections enriches our understanding of both nations. It shows that the United States cannot be fully understood without acknowledging the profound and lasting impact of Mexico's civilizations, culture, and people.